Hello my dears, welcome back to my tiny corner of the internet. Today is a Wednesday, which means I've got another book talk video for you guys. So this week I'm going to be talking about 4 of my favorite Stephen King books. This is going to be broken up probably into a 3 or 4 part series just because the man has such an extensive collection that there's so much to talk about. So these are in no particular order. It's not like from favorite to least favorite or anything like that. These are just the 4 that I picked out for today. But with that being said, the first one is one of my all-time favorites, and definitely one of my more recent favorites. Like say of things he's put out in the last 5, maybe 7 years, and that is the sequel to The Shining, Dr. Sleep. This is so good. And like most people that were a fan of that are a fan of The Shining, I was really nervous about this book. I knew that it was either going to be great or that it was going to be terrible. And of course it came, so long after The Shining came out that I think Stephen King had the same sort of worries. You can't do it too soon, and he waited, I think, just long enough that when we heard of it, we were intrigued, but of course also a little scared. However, I'm happy to report that, at least in my opinion, there was nothing to worry about. And he took such good care of Danny Torrance that it was just perfect to find out where he'd been. So for those not familiar, The Shining is the story of a family, a man named Jack and his wife and their son Danny, and Jack gets a job as a caretaker during the winter at the Overlook Hotel in Colorado. Now during the winter nobody's there, so he's just there to, keep the heat running, make sure the water keeps going, just take care of things so that once spring comes, the hotel's ready to open for season again. So Jack is a writer, and he thinks this is just a great opportunity for him because he will be able to go and live and write while still making money and spend time with his family. Now, of course, things don't quite go that well for Jack or his family. Jack slowly begins to lose his mind while at the Overlook, and his son Danny is just absolutely terrorized by this hotel. And we learn as it goes on that Danny has psychic abilities, and the hotel kind of sparks or wakes them up in him and just terrorizes him. So Danny's being terrorized, Jack's losing his mind, and the mother is just there kind of trying to keep them all alive. So fast forward a bunch of years, Danny is now an adult. He is a drunk like his father with a bad temper, and he floats from town to town doing menial jobs until eventually he hits rock bottom and he decides he's going to turn his life around, and he gets a job at a hospice where he can use those psychic abilities to take patients who are dying and, using his abilities, move them peacefully and easily into death. What an amazing job. So that seems to help him. Now, of course, there's a ton of other things going on in that book, and I don't want to give too much away, but that's just, a way to kind of get fans of The Shining hooked on it. Just tell them enough about, where Danny is and what he's doing so that you'll come and pick up the book and give it a read. There's also some touching moments where Danny is kind of confronting the ghost, not the literal ghost, but kind of the metaphorical ghost of his father, on the grounds of where the Overlook Hotel used to stand. And honestly, it brought me to tears. So this book is fantastic. Stephen King did a wonderful job of just picking up where that story left off and giving us a glimpse of where it all went from there. And then, of course, it's got Red Rum on the back. So, as I mentioned in my short story book talk video, Stephen King is, without a doubt, the master of the short story, and so I didn't include any of his books in that because I wanted to talk about them in a separate video. So I'm going to use this one for that. So the next 3 are short story collections. The first one is Night Shift, and this was actually the first collection of short stories that he put out, and it came out in 1978, I believe. And it came out right on the heels of The Shining, and it's just a masterful collection. Anytime anyone asks me where they should start with Stephen King, I always send them in this direction because you can't go wrong. There's, I think, 21 tales in here, one being Children of the Corn, which went on to become a movie in the 90s. An absolutely terrifying movie. I saw that movie before I read this book. I saw the movie, I think, when I was like in grade 7 or 8. And it was just, I was horrified. I don't know how or why I was watching it that young, but absolutely traumatized. So the story's in here, and it's fantastic. And they're all just so chilling. And there are so many in here that later went on to become, you know, movies or TVs, or there's just so many classic Stephen King stories in here that you cannot go wrong. So if you're not overly familiar but you'd like to dive in, this is a great place to start, in my opinion. Next up is Full Dark, No Stars. I love the look of this book and the title. I think it's so beautiful if we were to, you know, judge a book by its cover. So beautiful, and I just love that title, Full Dark, No Stars. Like, it really just gets you ready for what's about to happen. And I would have to say that out of all of his short story collections, this one was the one that gave me that good old-fashioned Stephen King creepy, scary, don't turn off the lights until I'm in bed feelings. And it's actually not a short story collection, it's more of a novella collection, and it's got, I think, 5 or 6 stories in here. And they're great, and they're really spooky, and yeah, I would definitely recommend it. The first one, it just starts off with a bang, and you're horrified the entire time until it's done. And this is, I think, a more recent one. I want to say, yeah, 2010. So not my all-time favorite by any means, but definitely great. He's just such an artful storyteller that, I mean, you can't go wrong. But, you know, in every collection there'll be stories that aren't for you, or that you don't get the appeal of, or maybe you don't get the appeal of the first time, but if you reread it later on down the road, you do. And I felt that way about this, one of the stories in here. Just didn't quite do it for me until eventually it did. Now, speaking of things happening eventually, the final Stephen King book I want to talk about today is Everything is Eventual, 14 Dark Tales. This is, I think, my favorite short story collection of his. It has the story 1408 in here, which, if that name sounds familiar, it became a movie in the, I think, like early to mid 2000s, starring John Cusack and Samuel L. Jackson. And it's the story of, once again, a haunted hotel. I'm a big fan always of haunted house, haunted hotels. They scare me so much. So 1408 actually came out of a short story. And it's one of those stories that, you know, you watch the movie and then you learn it's based on a short story, and you're like, how did all of this come from a short story? And it did, and it sticks very closely to it. And it's the story of a writer who actually writes about haunted hotels. You know, quote unquote haunted hotels. He goes to the hotels that are written about, you know, just fabled, where there's urban legend, ghost stories from, and he goes and he stays there and then he writes about them. And so he ends up at this particular hotel thinking it's going to be like all the others, and it is not. And he is just the night is just wreaking havoc on him. And it's one of the scariest stories I've ever read. Definitely. But definitely recommend this. Again, my favorite. There's just so many creepy tales. Sorry, I got distracted there reading the back for a bit. So many creepy tales, and not only that, there's also, in all of these collections, there's also the non-horror stories, which so often we get caught up in Stephen King as horror writer that we forget all of the beautiful non-horror stories he's written, like Hearts in Atlantis, Stand By Me, Shawshank Redemption, The Green Mile, so many, the list goes on. And also within these stories are just the smattering of classic Stephen King humor that sometimes you miss the first time around, or sometimes you don't, and you just find yourself laughing out loud at how funny he is in such a dark way. And I love that. I love his humor. So there you have it. Those are my 4 picks for Stephen King Part 1 here on my channel. Another thing to look for in these stories, in these books, are one of my favorite things about reading and reading his books, and it's the introductions and the afterwards, where he kind of talks to the reader. Constant reader, he calls you, and I just love it. So yeah, let me know what your favorite Stephen King books are. Let me know what your favorite Stephen King film adaptation is. I would love to know. And again, if you're interested in joining in on the book club for this month, we're doing The Book Thief, and it sounds amazing. I haven't started it yet because I'm actually finishing up another book right now, but I cannot wait to pick this up and dive into it. It sounds so good. So I hope you'll be reading along. If you are, let me know that as well down in the comments below. And until Friday, I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you then. Bye, guys.